Remember Bilo, that bold red and yellow signage, the no-frills aisles stacked with discount groceries, and the iconic "Why Pay More" slogan that sounded less like a question and more like a dare. For so many Aussies, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, Bilo was the budget destination. The place where your parents could fill an entire trolley without needing to sell a kidney. It was part of the rhythm of everyday life. Simple, affordable, and proudly unglamorous. But fast forward to today, and Bilo is gone. Wiped off the retail map like it never existed. And if you're thinking, wait, I never really heard what happened to it, well, that's exactly the point. Because Bilo didn't die of natural causes. It was quietly absorbed, repackaged, and erased. And that's where this story takes a darker turn. This isn't just about one grocery store shutting down. It's about the behind-the-scenes power plays that gave us a grocery duopoly that's so dominant, so entrenched, that real competition was effectively strangled for years. And in the process, everyday Australians were left with fewer choices and higher prices. Let's rewind to where it all began. Bilo was born in 1979 in South Australia, started by John, Peter, and David Weeks, with a mission that was as straightforward as its layout: offer everyday groceries at the lowest possible prices. It focused on value, and that made it a hit. Through the 80s and 90s, Bilo expanded rapidly. By the early 2000s, there were more than 180 Bilo stores across Australia. You could find one in nearly every suburb, often tucked into local shopping centres or strip malls. For countless Aussies, it was the cheaper, more accessible alternative to Coles and Woolworths. Unlike today's polished supermarket chains where every apple is perfectly shiny and every aisle screams curated marketing, Bilo was gloriously utilitarian. The shelves were stocked with what people actually bought: rice, pasta, meat trays, biscuits, tinned tomatoes, the basics that made up real family meals. Their private label range was huge, way before that became trendy. The stores weren't pretty, but they were practical. You came in with a list, you left with your budget intact. Then, in 1987, Bilo was acquired by Coles Myer, the same retail conglomerate that owned Coles supermarkets, Kmart, Target, and Myer. At first, the acquisition didn't seem like a red flag. Bilo continued to operate under its own name and serve its loyal customer base. It functioned as Coles' lower-cost counterpart, kind of like the Jetstar-Qantas relationship. The two coexisted, and for a while, it actually made sense. Coles catered to the middle and upper market, while Bilo kept its focus on bargain hunters. But behind the scenes, the strategy was already shifting. By the early 2000s, Coles Myer was under increasing pressure. Woolworths was overtaking Coles in sales, store presentation, and supply chain efficiency. Meanwhile, Aldi had arrived in Australia in 2001, bringing its ultra-streamlined, private label heavy model and shaking up the industry. Suddenly, Bilo was a potential liability, a redundant brand in a company struggling to keep up with the competition. So in 2006, Coles Myer made its move. It announced that Bilo stores would begin converting into Coles supermarkets. On paper, it sounded like a rebrand, but in practice, it was a slow and quiet purge. Some stores were shut completely, others were rebranded overnight. In many locations, longtime Bilo shoppers walked in to find the signage replaced, the shelves rearranged, and the prices noticeably higher. There was no goodbye, no explanation, just the cold efficiency of corporate consolidation. Coles claimed that this was about simplifying operations, streamlining logistics, and improving consistency. Classic PR speak for "we want to dominate the market." But let's be clear, Bilo wasn't failing. It was profitable. Customers still relied on it. The stores were still busy. What actually happened was that Coles saw more value in killing off its own competition than nurturing it. And by removing Bilo, it removed the only brand under its control that could have been a real challenger to Aldi or even an antidote to rising grocery prices. And this matters, because in the wake of Bilo's disappearance, something very predictable happened. Coles and Woolworths solidified their grip on the grocery market. At their peak, these two giants controlled over 80% of supermarket sales in Australia. That kind of market share encourages complacency. It lets companies set the rules, manipulate margins, and squeeze suppliers, especially small producers who have nowhere else to go. By the late 2010s, the signs were everywhere. Prices were inching up, even when supply chain costs weren't. More and more shelf space was being taken over by home brands owned by the supermarkets themselves. Variety started to shrink. Farmers and small food producers were speaking out about being strong-armed into accepting brutal contracts. And in some rural areas, people didn't even have access to alternatives. Fast forward to 2023, and the situation finally boiled over. As inflation gripped the country, grocery prices skyrocketed, and with it came growing suspicion that the big supermarkets weren't just passing on costs, they were pocketing extra profit. The ACCC launched a major investigation into potential price gouging. There were allegations that Coles and Woolworths had been raising prices even when supplier costs were going down. And when confronted, their explanations didn't always hold up. What this exposed was something many Australians already felt in their gut. The system is rigged. Now imagine if Buy Low had survived. Imagine if there was still a third national grocery chain designed specifically for affordability with no illusions of premium branding or corporate polish. It could have offered real price pressure. It could have pushed Coles and Woolworths to actually compete. It could have forced transparency in pricing and supply chains, but instead, it was sacrificed. Not because it failed customers, but because it worked too well for a company that wanted fewer choices and fatter margins. Thankfully, some competition has clawed its way back. Aldi now holds around 10% of the market and continues to grow. Costco has also found its niche, particularly with larger families or those willing to buy in bulk. And in some places, independent grocers and IGAs continue to hold the line. But the landscape is still tilted heavily in favor of Coles and Woolworths. Most Australians still rely on one or the other for the bulk of their shopping, and they know it. The death of Buy Low should serve as a warning, because it wasn't a natural market shift. It wasn't customers rejecting the brand, it was corporate strategy, plain and simple. It's what happens when power concentrates in too few hands, when branding matters more than affordability, and when a business decides it's better to kill competition, even if it's their own brand, than to risk losing market share. For those who remember Buy Low, the nostalgia runs deep. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't trendy, but it was reliable. It was where you bought your first pack of instant noodles, your first lunchbox snacks, and your first rushed midweek dinner ingredients. It was part of the rhythm of life for thousands of Aussie families, especially those living paycheck to paycheck. Losing Buy Low wasn't just about retail, it was about losing a little piece of economic fairness. So next time you find yourself at Coles or Woolies, staring at a receipt that feels a little too high, think about what could have been. Think about Buy Low, and remember that competition matters, because once it's gone, you rarely get it back. But what do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below and let's discuss. And if you enjoyed this story, give us a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell so you never miss out on more deep dives like this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, stay curious.